Hello, my name is Abe Isaac, and I'm the West Region Sales Agronomist with AgroLiquid. Today we are out in Dinuba, California, standing in an almond orchard, and after we've had about 5 inches of rain in the early fall, and so things are looking really good here as far as moisture is concerned, and getting a deep moisture. It's down to about 2 or 3 feet, and they were able to push sodium out of the soils and do those types of things. But one of the things I want to talk to you about today is that very issue: high sodium levels in the soils and what it does to your almond crop and crops in general, for that matter, especially permanent plantings such as almonds, stone fruit, walnuts, and things like that. It also will affect grapes as well. We're all very familiar with the sodium ring that comes around a drip emitter over the season as the water is irrigated into the tree and into the soil, and it pushes the sodium out to the outer ring, and you can see that. Fortunately, this time of year, we don't see a lot of that because of the rainwater that we've had and the abundance of it. But in drought conditions, that is what we always have. And during the summer, we'll start to see that come up here as our water quality has diminished greatly over the last several years. We're seeing much more bicarbonates in the water, sodium, and in some areas more, mainly on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. But here on the east side, we're starting to see the bicarbonates and the sodium build up. And as you get down into Kern County, you really start to see that sodium build up. But as I talk to more and more people and more growers, that is becoming a very big complaint. And so what you're seeing on that is can't see it off these trees here because there's no leaves. But throughout the growing season, you'll see burned leaves. You'll see damage from that. In really bad cases of it, you'll see defoliation, leaves falling on the ground, and they look like they've been hit with a blowtorch. So what do we do about sodium in the soil and getting picked up by the plant? There are several things that we can do, and I'll review some of the standards, the old standards. Probably the best one that people are using, or the most popular one that people have been using over the last 50 years, is putting gypsum into the soil. Depending on the percentage of gyp that you have, and then the calcium that is in that gyp, you can displace the sodium off the cation in the soil, and then irrigate and leach out that cation and sodium out of the root zone, and that is proven. It works well. Depending on what your pH of your soil is and the calcium level in that soil, you can look at your base saturation levels on your soil tests. It'll indicate where you need to be on there. The thing about gypsum is it doesn't change your pH. So if you've got a high pH or a low pH, because of the sulfur that's in it and the calcium, they offset each other, and so you get no effect on pH that way. If you get a low pH, which most growers here in the central San Joaquin Valley, especially on the east side, they suffer from higher pHs. You can put lime on, but that will raise it. So if you have a low pH, liming your soil will raise it. Now there's a lot of issues with that as well, depending on what your magnesium level is in that soil. If your magnesium level is high and you put that calcium on there, it will displace that. Magnesium will have a greater effect on your soil pH than even calcium will. So if you lower that, and even if you raise your calcium level in that soil, the magnesium level will go down. You can actually lower the pH a little bit, or at the very worst, stay at the place you were before. Besides the telltale signs of sodium burn and tissue burn on these leaves that you have during the growing season, you'll also see that your water doesn't go down very well. And in these drought conditions that we've had over the last several years, and after the last big drought that we had between 2012 and 17, and the appearances that we're in the process of having another one, we have had a wet fall and early winter, but weather patterns right now are saying maybe not a whole lot more rain between now and May, so things might dry out. We do have sustained wet soil deeper into the soil than we've had in the past, which is good. So we need to maintain that. So as we start to get into the spring and we haven't had rain, to maintain that deep moisture, irrigate maybe before you normally think you should, so to keep that going. Another thing that you can do is putting liquid calcium on on your ground through the drip system. What that does is that puts a higher concentration of that calcium that you want right in the wetting pattern. At the end of your irrigation will really help with remediating that sodium that's in the soil. A great thing to do is do that just before we do have a rainstorm. If you have something coming in and you're going to get some measurable rain, 1/2 inch to 1 inch of rain, irrigate, fill that profile up with water, put that calcium on there, let that cation exchange happen, and then you can start leaching that sodium out of that ground. One of the most important things to remember when you're dealing with sodium in your soils, it's best to be proactive instead of reactive. Once you see the damage starting in the trees and in the leaves, game's not over, but you're way behind. The best thing to do is to start dealing with that issue so that perhaps you can either greatly limit the damage that comes from it or not even see it at all. So that's why it's really important that we get that calcium in that soil and get irrigated in as early as we can, and even throughout the whole growing season. When does this really start to happen, the sodium burn and things like that? When we come out in the springtime and the trees let out, everything looks great. It doesn't matter if we've got a lot of sodium in that soil or even if there's a lot of sodium in that tree. The tree is well rested, hopefully. You put down a good post-harvest. It's got good nutrients in there. The buds are ready to go. Everything's popping and moving. But as soon as that heat comes in from the summertime, and we've had high 90s and 100-degree temperatures in early May, that's when you start to see that sodium effect start to do its job on your trees. So what do? You didn't do anything this year. You're going in this coming season, and you're thinking, I'm going to get sodium burn again. What are some of the things you can do? One, obviously, throw out some calcium. A liquid calcium is very good, and it's fairly inexpensive. I realize that we're dealing with some depressed prices on some of our commodities, but we need to balance our soils, and that would be the great way to do it. The next thing is go back and look at last year's tissue samples for potassium. Are they where you need to be? And even if they are just adequate, or maybe even a little on the high side, when that heat comes in there, that plant is looking for potassium to help regulate itself and deal with the stress. And so when that happens, the heat comes in, it says, I need that. I need to grab some potassium. I need to keep the stomata open and keep everything flowing. And so it tells the roots, get me some potassium. Next thing that you need to do is when you're looking at those tissue samples is feed this plant potassium. And maybe the root system is the best way to do that. Use a good soluble potassium, spray it on. When you're running through here, bloom sprays, you're going through here with fungicides, with any of your pesticide sprays, things like that, throw in a gallon or two. Feed these things. Take that money out of that budget that you're going through the soil with and go over the top. This will really help remediate that sodium burn that you have. I've done it. It works. I've done it many, many times. Well, if you've got high sodium in your soils, it's going to grab that sodium before the potassium is going to exacerbate the problem. Something to be concerned with. Be very focused in on this. When you look at your base saturation on your soil test, if your potassium level is lower than your sodium level, it doesn't matter. It will grab that sodium over that potassium. So if you've got that issue, deal with it. And two things: put more potassium in that soil and put some calcium in there to leach that sodium out of there. And you'll have some good results with that. One of the products that we talked about that we can put in the soil as far as soil amending goes is gypsum. Gypsum is called highly soluble. Well, highly soluble compared to what? Cement? Yeah, it's much more soluble than ground up cement. But what you're really looking at is something with 95 to 100% gyp in it. You're looking at about a pound to a pound and a half of soluble calcium per ton, per acre, per year to do this. And we've all put down gyp and seen the water go down. So it doesn't take a lot to do that. But that's not a lot of soluble calcium. The rest of it, over time, may become available if you've got good water, good soil biology, and everything else that's going on in that soil is working well, it'll break it down. So it's more like a Social Security plan than it is an immediate checkbook that you need right now to get by. But that is a fair source of doing that. Things that growers aren't always aware of with gypsum, though, is this. If your base saturation is below 60% or above 70%, that's out of the range that gypsum likes to work best. So, if that is the case, maybe you might want to go to a lime, or just be aware that you need to get that base saturation up to 60%. Guys in this area, they have a problem of being way over 70%. So it does have its limitations and going from there. Another problem that guys have, especially with the potassium issue, dealing with sodium burns, if you have a low potassium level in your soil and you want to raise it, it's very, very difficult to do that if you have a pH of over 6.5. So in conclusion of all this, I've thrown a lot of information at you. First of all, start off with a good soil test and look at your base saturation and see what's going on there. That will give you the best information that you can get. Talk to a CCA or your PCA and ask them for some help on that if you're having trouble reading that and understand which way to go. If you want to exchange that sodium, it takes calcium to move that. 1. 2, it's a double forked problem. And calcium in the soil, potassium into the plant, you'll have a lot more success with that than you will by just throwing calcium out into the soil. And it will come around much quicker. Number 3, you didn't get here in a day, you're not going to get out of the situation in a day. It does take time. But if you are methodical and you have to stay within a reasonable budget, it just takes time, but you can do it and change things in that orchard and that field for you. So again, this is Abe Isaac with Agroliquids, West Region Sales Agronomist, and I thank you for listening, and reach out to your local AgroLiquid retailer and they'll help you out. Thank you.